This is the way.
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 This is the way. This is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way.
All right, welcome to yet another episode of HVAC Rverse. This one is a response to someone's comment, a couple comments I've had. Someone asked a question via email, and I had a comment about hard starts. And this is not a bash or, hey, you're wrong, I'm right, or you're right and I'm wrong. This is a open discussion. Let's see the evidence and prove what's right and what's actually wrong and what's a misconception. Now, I'm not trying to say that you're wrong, and I would like for evidence to see that you're right on this. So what I'm talking about is, I had this one right here. It said, good job. I disagree with y'all about the potential relay style hard start kit causing damage or higher amps on startup. Somehow I believe you are mistaking higher amps for the start winding and not overall amps, and time is actually lower with a proper potential relay and start capacitor. The manufacturers used to put the part in to help with starting under a load or when a compressor has a differential in pressures and is harder to start the compressor. The main reason most units don't have it is because of money, and that soft start is nice, and I have installed them too. It is just too expensive. So, hey, I do agree with one thing there, and that's the hard start or the soft starts are expensive. I don't disagree. But they actually are provable in math that they do actually lower those startup amps. Now, with hard starts, and the reason why we think hard starts are lowering the amp draw is because we look at one thing. We put our meter on the common and we go, hey, I had 160 amps on startup prior to this hard start kit. Now I've got 110. And what really is happening is we didn't lower the amp draw. The amp draw is still the same. It's just our meter can't measure how fast it's happening. So prior to that start kit, let's just say it took 600 milliseconds to get to full speed and for the compressor to be all the way at startup. And that's where our meter read, because our meters, even the best meters, read at like 100 milliseconds. And when you're putting that hard start kit on, the amps are falling out faster because that potential relay is going out faster, probably before that 100 milliseconds happens, and your meter doesn't get a chance to read that full amount because it's not fast enough. And you would need an actual oscilloscope to do that, because the oscilloscope you could actually see over a period of time versus our meters are catching a snapshot. Now, I have had where technician said that his meter was reading, I think it was like 150 amps on inrush, and mine was actually reading at 156. Is it because my meter was better than his, or his meter was garbage, or my meter was garbage? Reality, we looked into it, and what it was my fluke meter read that inrush faster than what the actual field piece that he was using read. I think his field piece read just a little bit of more of a snapshot after that 100 millisecond spot, and my fluke meter says it reads right at 100 milliseconds, and that's where it captures. And that's a pretty good meter that I had. Now, that's not saying that it's the best. I'm not going to say that. But what I will say is, with hard starts, we're just, let's rewind back to when the compressor doesn't have a hard start, and we're just using the regular run capacitor, and that's how we're doing our phase shift and everything. So on startup, it's taking anywhere, the manufacturers on, I believe, Emerson Climate Technologies or Copeland says they give like 3 seconds on their overloads. So they're giving 3 seconds for that compressor to get up to speed. Now, the compressor should get up to speed a lot sooner than that, but we'll just say compressor took 600 milliseconds to get up to speed. Well, for those 600 milliseconds, that compressor, the windings on that motor were acting like a heater because the actual stator wasn't giving off its full magnetic energy, and it was taking a long time for that rotor to eat up that energy. And that's where our inrush comes in. Having a high inrush, let's say the data plate says 123 on lock rotor amps, it's saying that under perfect conditions, when they tested this piece of equipment out, their locked rotor amps was 123 amps. And they don't want it to, they're not saying that it's only going to be 123 amps. And if you're at 126, you're wrong. Because you can have higher locked rotor amps than what's on the data plate, but you have to look at the actual voltage coming in versus their voltage, which was like 230 volts. They're testing this equipment in a controlled environment with clean power. Everything's set up a certain way. So they're saying at 230 volts, when I applied power to this compressor under perfect conditions, my locked rotor amps was 123 amps. You may not have a perfect condition. You may have 248 volts. And yes, that's going to make your locked rotor amps higher because you are pushing more voltage through versus what the manufacturer states. And I bet most of the time you do the math, you say, well, at 248 volts, I'm X percentage above 230 volts. Is my locked rotor amps on my inrush the same? Is it 10% higher? We'll say if it was 10% higher, is my inrush 10% higher than what the manufacturer's rating is? It's going to be pretty close. I did this with technicians about a year and a half or so ago, where I showed you lower that voltage, that inrush is actually going to be lower. And then I have technicians go, well, how come on three-phase equipment, when I'm like closer to the 200 volt mark, it runs higher amps on startup? Well, it's taking longer to turn that motor on startup, and that's why you're getting that higher amp draw. So for those seconds, your stator is acting like a heater core. And as heaters get hotter, they create more resistance, and then they get even hotter because the amp draw goes up. Now, on the same scenario, when you throw a hard start on, instead of taking 600 milliseconds to get up to speed, it takes less than that. We'll just say 110 milliseconds. Well, your meter only read at that 100 millisecond point, or that 110 second millipoint. 110 milliseconds is a very short window. If your meter had read at, like, we'll say 50 milliseconds prior, it might have caught the actual full amp draw of what that system's doing. What a hard start's doing is it's making that compressor get up to speed much faster. But the amount of amps to get it up to speed is still the same, regardless. And I'm going to show that in a couple of web pages that I actually follow them and believe in some of their work and stuff. And I don't have to bust out my oscilloscope to prove this. They already did that for me. One of them is HVAC School, and the other one, what was that other one? It was HVAC Training Shop. So, two both pretty reputable sources. HVAC School with just Brian Orr, and HVAC Training Shop, pretty reputable. Just saying. This isn't like we're making stuff up and we're telling guys to not sell hard starts. Please, don't do that. Still sell hard starts. Still use them. They have a place and a time. Now, with a good hard start, can you help out over time? Are you going to lower energy bills? Yes. Yes and no. How long is it going to take to equate to the, let's just say you charge $350 for the hard start. Do you think it's going to take 1 year to recoup that $300 of that hard start, or 10 years? It's probably going to be more around the 10-year mark that it's going to take to recoup that $300 in energy savings. Soft starts, I will preface it, I've never stated a soft start saves energy. A hard start, in reality, does not save energy. It would take decades to recoup the amount of money in those items to actually say that they saved money. Because that millisecond or milliseconds are nothing compared to the amount of energy cost. So we measure energy like the cost at kilowatt hours. Do you think we'll just say 82 amps for 100 milliseconds? How long would that take to save money? It would take, that system would have, and that's only on startup that you're saving that money. So if you're in a well-designed area like Florida, where we want the equipment to run for long periods of time and not shut off, it's not really saving money. Now, does it help extend the life of a compressor? Yes, it can. If, and I preface it, if it is done correctly. Now, I know on like the older train equipment, they're reciprocating compressors with those sideways reciprocating pistons in them. You had to use Train's OEM hard start kit. Other hard starts would fail. Now, if you pull up the data plate of the compressor and you find the correct microfarads for starting components, sure, you can put a hard start in there. If you're putting it on a two-stage system, on a two-stage compressor, you cannot put a hard start on. Guys, I'm telling you, I've talked to several of the manufacturers. You cannot put hard starts on two-stage equipment. For one, you shouldn't have to, because that equipment should already start equalized due to the fact that when it shuts off, that the orbiting scroll turns and the discs separate a little bit and allow gas to bleed by. So your system should be equalized. Where hard starts are good for, long line set runs, hard stop TXVs. But once again, it's got to be an appropriately sized hard start kit. So let's look at one of these things here real quick. I'm going to move a microphone over. All right. So this camera is wigging out on me. We're just going to go back to this camera and make life a little easier. And I'm just going to rotate this camera down so you guys can see this stuff. So, this is out of a house that, and we call these 521 relays, right? This is out of a house that I had a compressor fail. And I'm going to explain why the compressor failed with this. So let's go back to why this took out the compressor. We have this 521 relay, as we like to call them, or these kick starts. And this was the appropriately sized starting component for that compressor. It could take a starting component on it. But the problem is that this relay failed. And what happened was it failed the contacts shut. It starts out with the contacts closed. And when it gets back EMF from the compressor, it energizes the relay in here to open those normally closed contacts. Well, if that contact fails, you're continuously surging power into that compressor, which is going to cause it to fail. I don't mind hard start kits. I really don't. But I believe that these have a time and a place. That's why I like these. And that's why I don't say you can't use a hard start kit. But these right here, yes, they're a little more pricey. But the nice part about them is same style potential relay. It's got the 521 on it. But what it has that most other hard starts don't have is this fusible link in here. So heaven forbid this relay did fail and welded shut and was continuously sending power, it would pop that fuse and it would stop. And then also, same manufacturer, which is Amrad. This is another reason why I like their capacitors over other capacitors. With their run relay, or with their run capacitors, they have this little terminal right here, CPT, They call it the compressor protector terminal. Your hard start's going to go to there. Now, if that hard start stays engaged and this compressor continues to run with that hard start and not backing off on those amps, it's going to pop that fusible link, protecting the compressor, not taking the compressor out. What's cheaper? Capacitor, fusible link on a hard start kit, or a compressor? I'm going to go ahead and say the run capacitor or the fusible link is going to be a lot cheaper than the hard start kit, or than the compressor, sorry. Now, these are cool and all. The 3-in-1s. These have like solid state relay in them. You can mount them in any position. I personally don't like these. Where these work out well is in small compressors for refrigeration application. That's kind of where I see a lot of these on these under-counter freezers and refrigerators, which is fine. I'm not saying that you can't use this stuff. I'm just saying I would prefer this capacitor in conjunction with this. Now, if you don't want to replace the run capacitor and you just use this that has a fusible link, go for it. Do it. I have nothing wrong with that. It's going to protect that compressor. True compressor protection, right? Now, in the instance with this relay welded itself shut, so it never opened, and it was constantly sending power to the start winding, and it popped, overheated, and that compressor shorted out. So it was no longer any good, all due to this. Now, if, let's say, we didn't know that, and when we replace a compressor, we're just going, okay, automatically we're replacing all starting components, contactor, capacitors, start assist if it has it. And if we're doing the start assist and it's a replacement, might as well put the OEM stuff in, right? Now, if you didn't check and you didn't know, you would never know that that relay is why that compressor failed. You're just going to go, oh, probably poor oil return or surge of electricity, something along those lines. Now, if you had the AMRAD Universal Hard Start Kit, and it's got the multiple taps for you to set up where you want to put your position at, yeah, you could tell because you would be able to measure across that fusible link and go, yeah, this thing blew because it was staying engaged. Now, also with that being said, another reason why I say if it doesn't really need a hard start, if you're trying to do a hard start just to get a cell, what's going to happen, let's just say I'm putting a hard start in because I think the reason why the run capacitor is constantly having to get replaced is because, hey, it's having a hard time starting up. When in reality it wasn't. And you put a hard start on there and that run capacitor still fails because there's a lot of heat on that piece of equipment because of where its orientation is. The sun bakes on it all day long and just puts heat soak inside that cabinet, and it causes premature failure, something along the lines, or the compressor's having an early failure because it had poor oil return or whatever. When that run capacitor fails, this type of start assist, even this one right here, what's going to happen is as that compressor slows down because the run capacitor's failed, that start assist, the back EMF is going to fall out, and then it's going to close that potential relay, give it that boost of energy, get it turning again, and then as it falls back out, and you can hear it sometimes, you'll walk up to you and hear, and that compressor surging, and then you turn it off and you check the run capacitor, and run capacitor's done, and you're like, man, I don't know how this thing was still running. It was still running because of this. This was just putting it back into cycle every time the back EMF would fall out. When that compressor would fall below to about 80% of its speed, that would kick back into place. So it's not a thing of I'm right and you're wrong. Just look at the variables and how today we're getting more into the science of how we're doing things. Multiple sources have stated that start assist do not lower amp draw. It doesn't. And it for what you would think it does, it's actually making it start sooner, and we can't measure that amp draw. So it still measures the same thing, and I'm going to show you on, I'm going to take it over to right here. So on this one, it shows, this is from the HVAC training shop. Don't be mistaken, a hard start kit doesn't help the AC's compressor consume less amps when starting. The hard start kit shortens the time that your AC's compressor draws startup amps. The net effect is that your AC's compressor is in its startup period for a shorter period of time. Well, how do we prove that? They don't show that, but Brian Orr does from HVACschool.com. And here he shows with an oscilloscope what's actually happening. So you can see in this oscilloscope that we're having this right here, 200 amps for over a 600 millisecond period, and then it probably falls out. Put in the hard start or start assist on there, and what's happening is, if you look, okay, you go ahead and say, well, on my run winding, I'm a little bit less than 200 amps where it was 200 amps up here. But that's not the case. Now we're adding 50 amps to the start winding, and guess what? Add 50 amps to 100 amps, and we're still, or add 50 to 150 amps, and we're still at 200 amps. Did we lower the amp draw? No. By the time our meter reads, it's probably somewhere in this point right here. We're probably reading right about here. And yes, at that point in time on the common wire, we're going to read a lower reading. But our meter couldn't capture all this back here. But the oscilloscope can. So we're capturing that all back here, and we're seeing that we actually never lowered the amp draw. What we did do is we lowered how long it took for that compressor to start up. And this is actual science. This isn't just made up mumbo jumbo, and I'm trying to say, hey, you guys shouldn't do this, or hey, that's the wrong way to go about it. Even he says that hard starts are for long line sets, 100% shutdown TXVs. Here, let's see, it's explained right here. The compressor doesn't go up to speed until about 550 milliseconds, and at that point, both the run and start winding amperage drops. This proves that the hard start kit is working in that case. You can tell this only because, and this is for this system right here, he showed this right here on startup. This is the run winding amps, and how it took almost 200 milliseconds to get up to speed in order for the amp draw to come down. And then he kind of took something similar and took it right here where it shows, hey, it took under 600 milliseconds to get it up to speed, and then our amp draws went down. That's just showing that hard start kit did something. Now, here it's just kind of an exaggerated time period of that hard start. No hard start, we're going over 600 milliseconds, and for 600 milliseconds, probably like, guys, probably that's like half a second, or maybe even 1 second. And we're hitting over 200 amps on startup. Then it shows the same system right here on startup that, hey, the run winding gets up to about 150, and the start winding is now getting up to about 50 amps on startup, but it's all happening under 100 milliseconds, which your meter is not going to read that, and it's going to capture right about here, and then it's going to go, oh, well, I lowered it down to about 100 amps. So this is really what's happening with hard starts. And that's why I like to say, I'm not saying hard starts don't work. They don't actually lower the amp draw. They do shorten the time of starting. Can it be effective at helping the compressor? Yes, because the compressor doesn't have to start for as long. But you need to have some kind of protection in there, and that's why I say I only allow these on my trucks. This is the only start assist that I have on my trucks. That's it, period. Because I've seen too many compressors fail from having these, and the contacts weld shut. Or some other company comes in there a few years later and messes with your stuff, and they make you look like an idiot, and then they mount it this way when it's supposed to be mounted like this. So now that relay doesn't have a way to fall out, and it makes it harder for it to do it, and it sticks. So I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with them. Like I said, I would just like to see the evidence that a hard start actually lowers amp draw. Now, if you want to go the route of, well, I'm not running that many amps for an extended period of time, do the math and show me where's the value in that. Because if you're starting up in 100 milliseconds versus 600 milliseconds or 700 milliseconds, we haven't even hit 1 second yet. How much energy are you saving in that time frame? And that's only on startup. You actually are not saving money over the course period of time because that's only when it's starting up. So that means your system start, stop, start, stop, start, stop. If you have that issue, yeah, but then you have bigger problems. You shouldn't be short cycling like that. You should run for an extended period of time, be off for a certain amount of time, run for an extended period of time, be off for a certain amount of time. But I'd like to see the math behind hard starts actually save energy. I would like to see the math on that. Can they save a compressor? Sure. Do they shorten the startup time? Sure. In a roundabout way, everybody says they stop the lights from dimming. What really happens is the lights don't dim for as long, so you don't see it. Now, if you had an incandescent fixture, you would still see it kinda, but with hard starts where you stop seeing the lights dimming is like the fluorescent and the LED stuff, because it's happening so quickly that driver still has energy stored into it, so you haven't seen the dim. Now on an incandescent, you'll see the dim. If lights are dimming because of your air conditioner, you need to look at something completely different. Maybe the panel's not balanced correctly, and those are having too much of a draw on where they're at. Now, speaking of hard starts, I had a customer one time, and this is kind of like a weird situation where they had a company come out because the unit wasn't working. Company found the breaker was tripped, and they said, oh, it's because you have a bad run capacitor. So they replaced the run capacitor, unit trips the next day, and they said, oh, it's having a hard time starting. So they put a hard start in, not the incorrect size. They put the correct size hard start in, and they said, this will help with your lights dimming too. It'll save you energy. Well, the next day, the unit tripped again. And at this point in time, the customer got frustrated. They told him, well, at this point in time, you need to call an electrician. So an electrician came out and said, oh, you got a weak breaker. So now they're upset because they just spent all this money on a run capacitor, start capacitor, and the electrician says it's because you got a bad breaker. The electrician puts a new breaker in, and the next day it doesn't trip, but the following day after that, it trips again. So now it's tripped. Now they have a brand new breaker, hard start, new run capacitor, and they call the air conditioning company back out, and the air conditioning company says, oh, it's a bad disconnect. Put a new disconnect in, and it trips again the following day. The customer at this point in time was told that they need a new unit. That was the ultimate resolution. So they wanted a second opinion. They called us out. One of my texts is like, hey, I just don't want to make the wrong decision on here, and I would like a second set of eyes on this. So I go out there, take a look, and I asked the customer, is there a certain time of the day this is tripping, or is it just random, or what else might be going on? Well, the lady states, she says, well, it trips. It seems like it's tripping around the 3 o'clock hour every day. That's when we notice it. So it happened to be about, I think it was like 2:30, 3 o'clock, somewhere around the time when we were there. I start looking at things, and I know we're going off on a tangent here, but I start looking at things, and I noticed that the sun's beating on this electrical panel. And I asked the customer, how long have you lived here? And they said for 3 years. So I'm just doing some investigating, and it's hitting like the bottom half of this electrical panel. And the top half's not getting any sun because like part of the roof of the neighbor's house is blocking the panel. But that bottom part of the panel, man, it is 165 degrees, and it's radiating into this, and the breaker's on the lower part of the panel. So I'm looking around, and I notice that there looks like a freshly cut down tree in the neighbor's yard. And I asked the customer, did they have a tree cut down recently that was right in this area? And they were like, yeah. I said, hey, I want to try something. I want to move this breaker to up here and move your water heater breaker down to here. And that's exactly what I did. And guess what didn't trip? That breaker for 2 weeks. And we were sitting above 110 for like, I think it was like 28 days or something here in Arizona. And they were so impressed that we actually dug into it instead of saying, yes, you need a unit. And they actually went with us to replace the equipment because it was older. I want to say it was like 22 years old and reciprocating compressor, everything. And I was like, it sucks. You don't exactly need a unit. Would it be more efficient? Sure. So they wound up going with us, and we were $3,000 than the previous company on replacing that unit. But we showed that we were just there to do the right thing and not just replace that breaker or that piece of equipment. We actually wanted to find the problem, and it happened to be because that panel was getting hot. Because for so many years, that tree had been blocking the sun from that panel. Until recently, this summer, it didn't. But that goes back to doing what's best for the customer. Are these best for the customer? Depending on the application. What you're selling it for and what you're using it for is what's best for the customer. If you're telling the customer this is going to save them on electricity, the answer is no, we're not doing what's best for the customer. If we're telling the customer this is going to possibly extend the life of their compressor, I would agree. This will possibly extend the life of the compressor. Now, if it's a 2-stage unit, don't put a hard start on there. You can't do it. I have talked to LG. I have talked to Emerson Climate Technologies, which is Copeland, and I have talked to the rep for Alliance Compressors, which turns out is Copeland. It's an Emerson Climate Technologies product. And they all state, do not use start assist on their 2-stage compressors. They are not designed for it. They cannot handle it. You shouldn't need it because that system should already be equalized. Even with a long line set, you should not need it. It doesn't start up the same way a single-stage scroll works starts up. So it's kind of my tangent. Nothing crazy, super out of whack. I just wanted to address that. I wasn't trying to insult anybody. I'd like to see evidence. If I'm wrong, I'd like to see the evidence because I want to be knowledgeable and spread good information. I don't want to spread bad information. And that's ultimately why I came on here for this. I'd like to know what you're finding and where your sources are that are stating that hard starts lower amp draw. Because the big dogs of the league of this industry have shown that it doesn't. It doesn't lower amp draws. It does shorten the amount of time that a system is in start. Yes, I will agree there. It does shorten that time. Does it lower the amp draw? No. So, just curious if you can shoot that information over to me. I would really appreciate it. Maybe we can get on here and talk about it, go back and forth, have a friendly conversation about it. I would like that, and I would like to see the evidence. I'm always willing to support and back up anything I say with solid evidence and science. I like to prove what I'm saying. I don't like to speak out of my butthole, essentially. I like to give good information and reliable information. That's why this right here, this being a good start assist, is not a fact. This is an opinion. That's my opinion. I think that's a better product than this, the Kickstarts, or this, the Supcos, the 3-in-1s. I think it's a better product, personally. So, appreciate the feedback. I really do. And I hope maybe we can talk about it some more and I can understand and see your side of things and understand where you're getting information from and see how accurate it is. Other than that, I appreciate it. And I hope everybody has a good rest of what's left of this summer and keep on HVACing. If you like this video or any of the other videos, hit that like button, subscribe, leave a comment, and as usual, happy HVACing.